Good afternoon and welcome to the Christmas special edition of Have We Got Planning News for You. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again this week for our last episode of 2020. As you can see, I've probably performed the most pathetic attempt at Christmas fancy dress in the history of humankind because Santa hats are unavailable on Fleet Street, so I decided to garnish myself in tinsel. Chris, I'm not quite sure, is that actually a virtual Christmas jumper or an actual real one? and it's the King in the North Pole, the man himself. Absolutely epic. Lovely to see you all. Can I start once again, as always, by reminding you, please do to consider a charity donation in lieu of registration fee. You know by now that charities we support include the NHS Combined Charities Just Giving page and Shelter, obviously a subject particularly topical to today's discussion. But of course, please feel free to donate to a charity of your choice if you so prefer. Welcome YouTube viewers once again. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we are delighted today to welcome as our final guest of the year, Clare Miller, CEO of Clarion Housing Group, the largest affordable housing provider in the UK. Clare, good afternoon. Please share where you're from and what are you drinking, if anything, this evening?
Good afternoon, everyone. And I feel terrible that I have made such a little effort with my Christmas decorations. I do have a little tree with me, however.
That's lovely.
And I'm in the office, as you can probably guess, and I've got my Clarion mug with me. I'd love to say that it's full of mulled wine, but the truth is it's full of green tea.
That's very, very virtuous of you. Well, we're really looking forward to having a discussion with you on affordable housing and from your perspective as CEO of the largest provider of affordable housing in the second half of the show. As I say to all our guests, you're very welcome, but by no means obliged to comment on any of the cases we discussed in the first half of the show. And without further ado, let's introduce the panel, starting as always with Mary, once again eschewing the woods for the Cook Gallery.
Good evening, Charlie. Hello, everybody. Mary Cook from Town Legal, and yes, I'm in Wandsworth, and I've got Rudy. Can you see Rudolph?
Oh, yes.
In the background, and I'm here with my usual favourite Padstow gin. Happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas, Mary.
Happy Christmas.
Chris, is that you behind the mask?
That really is me. I've been in inquiry, dressed like this all day. Mr. Singleton, the inspector, could see the funny side of it. I've been against Gwion Lewis, some news about him coming up. And so I'm in an inquiry and I'm back in the inquiry next week. Can you believe that? Right up until the 23rd. I am not a happy bunny. But look, Presumption's flown down to join me. He's all in the Christmas mood as well. I'm drinking Christmas cream. And inspired by Judge Rinder, I've got this little mug to drink it out of, but with the ability to have a little bit of a spirit. And Mary, this is on its way to you soon. Remember this from the summer?
Tarquin's, yes.
This is the Hell Bay Isles of Scilly. So I'm just going to top up this little bit, and then I can have 2 drinks at once, and then send the bottle over to you.
Fantastic. The King in the North Pole. How are you all?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Charlie. Santa is coming. Be warned. For the show where we had the little set 2 and the King of the North introduction, my wife had bought me this ludicrous outfit to wear. So I had to wear it for something. This is a genuine Jon Snow outfit from the remainder shop. I will remove all the different slightly S&M stuff shortly. So I'm in Lancashire, Paul Tucker, King's Chambers. I too am in inquiry. Happily, I have a sensible inspector who has chosen to adjourn tomorrow till January rather than next week. Should be against me, Chris. What can I say? But it's lovely to see you.
Sash, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Charlie. Thank you. And I'm in London. I'm in my room in Chambers, hating Tier 3, but there we are. We were all planned to go and celebrate, but there we go. We'll have to put it off till July. But I am drinking a cup of tea at the moment, and I'm also actually, I thought I wouldn't start drinking, because if I started drinking, Arsenal having got a point last night, I wouldn't stop. So I thought I'd show some restraint as Christmas has come early for me.
Good to see you, sir. Charlie Buller here, Keating Chambers, out of quarantine, but still in the UK. You can leave some clothes on, Paul.
I think you're wearing an Alvin Stardust tribute gear now.
Before the war dead. I'm drinking Northern Monk for no other reason than it was in the fridge in Chambers, and I've just come off the back of a High Court hearing and a con. But Northern Monk, of course, is the drink I had earlier on in this show. And without further ado, we'll crack on because we've got lots of cases to get through. We've got 6 today, and no fewer than 6. It's been a busy week as the courts and decision makers are clearing their decks. And I'm first up with my very favourite subject, as regular viewers will know, Heathrow Airport. The Supreme Court has spoken. So as you will, indeed, in fact, I've got my cufflinks. There we are, the cufflinks that I wore in the High Court and Court of Appeal, Concord cufflinks. So Heathrow, as you know, was the subject of the airport's national policy statement, which was ratified by Parliament, adopted by the Secretary of State for Transport at the time, Chris Grayling. And the ANPS, as it is known, endorses the principle of a new runway and associated terminal and other infrastructure at London Heathrow Airport. And in doing so, accepted that principle of that proposal instead of expansion at Gatwick or other alternatives such as Heathrow Hub's alternative proposal of the extended northern runway, in which the northern runway had effectively been made as long as 2 runways, and then airports could take off and land on the same runway. In the High Court and Court of Appeal, there were a wide range of issues advanced. The Mayor of London, the London Borough of Hillingdon, and various other local authorities took grounds on SEA, habitats, including in relation to the surface transport issues, how people are going to get to and from Heathrow without pollution or congestion. There was issues related to the rejection of Gatwick. Heathrow Hub, who promoted the extended northern runway scheme, which they said they had IP rights, which they wanted to sell to Heathrow Airport Limited. They brought forward competition issues, saying that the rejection of their proposal in favour of the Northwest Runway scheme was in breach of competition law and other grounds of public law. And all of that was defended by the Secretary of State for Transport, Heathrow Airport Limited, the airport operator, and the Aurora Group, who I act for in the High Court and Court of Appeal. They want to build the 6th terminal and run it in competition with Heathrow Airport's existing terminals. All of those issues failed in the High Court and Court of Appeal, but one ground succeeded in the Court of Appeal, brought by 2 grounds, 1 point, effectively, were brought by Friends of the Earth and Plan B Earth, who are the sort of legal arm of Extinction Rebellion, as far as I can tell. Those grounds related to an alleged failure to take into account the Paris Agreement on climate change, and particularly the targets on carbon reduction. The Court of Appeal agreed with the arguments put forward by Friends of the Earth and Plan B Earth. They said that firstly, the requirement in Section 5 of the Planning Act 2008 for the airport's national policy statement to have regard to government policy, quote unquote, including a requirement to have regard to the government's commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change, even though it's only an international law commitment. It's not yet been transposed into domestic law in relation to the targets for carbon reduction. Those remain to be transposed. And they said, well, that was still a government policy. And secondly, in any event, the Court of Appeal said, agreeing with Friends of the Earth and Plan B, that the requirement in Section 10 of the Planning Act 2008 to have regard to sustainable development, and in particular in that context, the avoidance and mitigation of climate change, that too engaged a duty to have regard to the Paris Agreement targets, even though they hadn't been specifically transposed in domestic law. The Secretary of State of Transport didn't appeal to the Supreme Court. They stayed neutral in the proceedings. I don't think it's controversial to say that was for ostensibly political reasons, given the Prime Minister's lukewarm stance on Heathrow. But Heathrow Airport Limited did appeal, and they succeeded this week, yesterday in fact. And what the courts held was on the point about government policy. It said that the requirement in Section 5 of the Planning Act before the adoption of ANPF, of a national policy statement of anyone, not just the airports one, to have regard to government policy, it was important to read that narrowly, because otherwise it would be a bear trap, as the court said, for government. And what you need is something formal, something specific, like an NPPF type policy, or at least if it was going to be a statement by on behalf of government in Parliament or something like that, it had to be clear, precise and unconditional, and general comments by government ministers that Paris would be implemented in due course didn't amount to a government policy. And nor too was there any merit, the Supreme Court thought in the suggestion by the Court of Appeal that the mere ratification of on the international law sphere of Paris by the UK meant that it was government policy, because international treaties don't have legal effect in English law unless they've been transposed. And in relation to the sustainable development consideration, what the Supreme Court said is that the desirability of mitigating and adapting to climate change, which is the limit of sustainable development that was an issue here, didn't compel, in legal terms, the Secretary of State to have regard to the specific targets in the Paris Agreement. The evidence was clear. The Secretary of State thought about the Paris Agreement in the context of the MPS, had regard to it, but decided that it wasn't necessary to give particular weight to the targets insofar as they went beyond the adopted law in the Climate Change Act. So all of that the Supreme Court thought was a matter of discretion, and there's no legal issue in play. There were associated SEA points that also failed. So where does this leave us? Well, in Heathrow, in terms of Heathrow generally, it means that the ANPS still stands. It's obviously open to the government to decide to review it if they so wish, but they don't have to review it, as the Court of Appeal held that was the position. So it means that as things currently stand, Heathrow Airport Limited, or indeed the Aurora Group, or both, could come forward with a DCO application in reliance on the ANPS. Will Heathrow Airport Limited do that? Do the economic conditions currently exist for Heathrow expansion right now? Certainly in a wholesale one lot, I'd be surprised if they do, but you might see incremental applications, for example, for elements of the infrastructure. And secondly, where does this leave the general position in relation to the Paris Agreement on climate change in, for example, the context of other national policy statements or plan making, because there's a very similar duty to have regard to sustainable development in the context of local plans. Well, all the references in other cases of reliance by potential claimants and actual claimants on the Court of Appeal's judgment is now on very shaky ground indeed. And it seems that position before the Court of Appeal's judgment has been restored, namely that it's only necessary to have regard to things which are actually law and policy, as opposed to things which operate on the international plane. So that's my summary of the Heathrow judgment. And over to you, Paul, for your, I think it's first of two cases you're going to cover today.
Apparently so. And you were so excited to get through to Heathrow, Charlie, that you missed off the most important thing, which is to congratulate the new silk. So
I'm going to do it at the end, but you're absolutely right. Let's do that now, just in case people tune off. I was going to do that at the end. Yes, it's been a happy day today for a number of people in the planning world, because there are, I think I'm right in saying, 4 newly appointed planning QCs who succeeded. And I think I'm going to do this in order of seniority. I believe it's Megan Thomas first, Jenny Wigley, Richard Honey, and Guion Lewis. Really thrilled for all of them. So congratulations if you're watching, and they will take the letters after the name sometime early in the new year. So excellent news. Now, I was going to mention at the end, but you're absolutely right, Paul. Let's do it now while everyone's watching.
Yes, so the first of my 2 cases, in honour of Guion, no doubt, is a Welsh name that I will mispronounce. So apologies for this. So Guion. Wyeth Price against Guildford. This is a judicial review into the grant of permission for 73 dwellings by Guildford, by a residents' association. The site was part of a strategic allocation. It's a greenfield site in a recently adopted local plan, but it's close to a cluster of listed buildings. So one of which is a grade 2 star farmhouse, another of which is a grade 2 oast house, and another barn nearby. So necessarily this engaged the issue of Section 66 of the Listed Buildings Act, and whether or not considerable weight was given to the special separate statutory duty to have regard to the special historical architectural interest of the listed buildings. the test is in a case called Palmer, where you don't have to set out a specific form of words. It's no longer say those words, otherwise you don't get through legally. The issue is the courts will presume that the members have adopted the right approach unless there is a clear inference to the contrary. And what the courts found in this case was, on a very closely reasoned analysis of the officer's report, Mrs. Justice Lang found that instead of giving considerable weight to the impact upon the significance of the listed buildings, it had been a straightforward planning balance. Mary's firm did a summary of this case today, which I saw after scribbling these notes, and deals with it beautifully, which is, says this: the officer had treated less than substantial harm that would be caused to heritage assets as a less than substantial consideration. That's great. That's the sort of phrase which will stick in my mind. There was a second ground which was pursued with regard to a failure to report Wildlife Trust objections, but that didn't succeed. So it's an interesting case. It's one of a number on heritage issues, but it beautifully sets out the Palmer test and applies it. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Paul. We'll come back to you for your second instalment in a few moments' time. But first, Chris, you've got a planning appeal from South Northamptonshire to tell us about.
Yes, I have, and just congratulations to Gwion. I've been against Gwion all week, and as Paul quite rightly observed, he hasn't stopped smiling all day, apart from when I continually interrupted his re-examination. Now, in terms of this case, as you know, I have a hobby, Charlie, and that is to find cases in which Paul Tucker has lost. Right, and I go to extraordinary lengths. I've got a whole Compass account just to I try really hard. Anyway, I found one, so that's what it's got. No real significance. I just want to talk about it. In the case was Hugh Flanagan, who was successful, and he called Andrew Murphy, who was successful as the witness. And the appellant unfortunately lost. Stephanie Hall was involved in the case, but unfortunately she was led by one Paul Tucker. It's about some fields in Northampton that now will very safely not be developed. The reality is a proposal for 300 homes, which was, I'm going to call this the Hansel and Gretel approach to sustainability, because Paul ran a case that suggested that it was absolutely fine for all of the residents from these 300 houses to have to walk through woods on an unmade path just to get to the bus stop and to get to the local shops. And strangely enough, the inspector didn't go with it. No, the inspector highlights the journey through the woodland, which not everybody would enjoy after dark. Fine if you're a cast member from Game of Thrones, but you know, not everybody, Paul, find that acceptable. Crikey. And in addition to that, it was a very, very long way to the shops. And the thing of note is that you ran a case of about 2 kilometres being perfectly acceptable, and the inspector rejects that and highlights the national design guidance and says the national design guidance is relevant because that talks about 10-minute walks, 800-metre radius. So we've all got to watch out for that. We're promoting development. If the council wants to highlight the national design guidance. You then ran a case about cycling. You said everybody could cycle there, and the inspector was saying, well, not everybody cycles, for goodness sake. Then you ran a case about electric bicycles, and no, he wasn't having that either. He's waiting for that transformational change in attitude before electric bikes can be allowed. The local residents raised the concern about passing through the woods in the hours of darkness. And the bus company even turned up and said nobody would use the buses, it's too far. Now, I think you've been unfairly dealt with, Paul. I really do. I think it's a perfectly good site, a perfectly good proposal. Who doesn't enjoy a good walk through the woods just to catch the bus? And so unfortunately, Paul came second. But that is such an unusual thing. I think I've been milking it for the last 5 minutes.
We gave them lanterns in the 106, Chris. What's the matter with you?
No, from walking in the woods and aeroplanes to another form of transport, which is electric vehicles. And Paul, you're going to tell us about a case involving electric car charging facility.
Yes, I am. I should say to any of our guests that are watching, if you actually want to know what the case is about, you probably better read it in the light of that introduction. So yes, this is an electric service area, a location for 102 car point charges for electric vehicles. So it's a service station in the Cotswolds. It's a diddy little site in the Cotswolds. So in a week that's seen the Secretary of State issue the standard methodology number 2, that we've had the Supreme Court judgment in Heathrow, that we've had South Oxfordshire adopting their local plan, I'm given a service area in the Cotswolds. Do you know why? Because Charlie Banner won it. Charlie Banner won it when the authority surrendered. It was a 2.5-day inquiry. In fairness, it was a redevelopment of a scrap metal location in the middle of nowhere, but suitably located between motorways and close to a place called Cheltenham, whoever had lived there. And the argument was run in front of Mr. Inspector Paul Singleton about how there was a need to bring forward car charging locations in suitable locations around the country, because you drive the change to electric cars by having the facilities to charge them up. My suspicion is this is actually quite an important case. I hate saying that when Charlie won it. This is quite an important case because there will be others. This will inform service station on motorways, garages at appropriate locations between roads, but certainly between strategic road networks. And there's bits in it which are of importance, frankly, such as the Secretary of State's policy to get rid of new diesel and petrol cars by 2030. But the corollary of that is to make sure we've actually got the infrastructure to cope with it. And there's an interesting throwaway comment about Western Power's approach to make sure they've got enough power in the system to facilitate all the charging points. So whilst Charlie didn't get costs because the council had relied upon the Highway Authority, who then surrendered once they realised Charlie was instructed, nonetheless, it's still an important case and a good win, and one that I suspect will be rolled out on a number of occasions. And I specifically commend the approach of Mr. Inspector Paul Singleton on the powering balance on paragraph 87 of it, because he deals with it in a way which is absolutely exemplary. So another big case. Obviously, there were no house extensions or garages or patios this week. So
he offered in Heathrow and he wanted to be the martyr.
Yeah, I'll be very Morecambe to your any wise, Charlie.
Another feature of that case, of course, is the first ever planning inquiry to be conducted partly from Sweden. May also be trend-setting. Now, Mary, you're next, and you're going to tell us about the examination into the West Grinstead neighbourhood plan.
I am, thank you very much. Yes, so this is a report by an examiner called Andrew Ashcroft into the West Grinstead neighbourhood plan. And remember, everybody, he's not examining soundness, but he's considering whether the neighbourhood plan meets the basic conditions, complies with convention rights and the other statutory requirements. And the particularly interesting thing I want to draw out about this neighbourhood plan is that the neighbourhood plan sought to designate not only local green spaces, but also local gaps. With regard to local green spaces, the inspector was entirely happy that the evidence demonstrated compliance with the criteria in paragraph 99 and 100 of the NPPF. And there was no issue really in relation to the local green spaces, but the local gap was far more contentious. And just to provide some context, the local authority, Horsham had a local plan which was adopted in 2015, and Partridge Green, which was the biggest settlement within this neighbourhood plan, was a medium village in that settlement hierarchy. And the local plan provided that beyond the main towns of Horsham, Southwater and Billingshurst, 1,500 or so homes needed to be provided elsewhere through neighbourhood plans. So there was strategic basis for all these neighbourhood plans. However, Horsham are advancing a new local plan, as Chris and indeed Clare will know, and they're at the regulation 18 stage, and they are inching their way towards Reg 19 next year. But in that context, they are looking at development sites, and this neighbourhood plan proposed 3 sites as local gaps, and the idea also was to include a non-land use aim or aspiration to secure the redevelopment of parts of an industrial estate. It was not a policy. It was expressed as being simply an aim. And the reason for all of that was because in the background, Horsham had identified 2 of the local gaps as sites that were suitable for development in their evidence base to their emerging local plan. And so the inspector had to consider, on the one hand, the suitability of the principle of local gaps. And there, to be fair, there was a strategic policy, policy 27 in the local plan, which sought to prevent coalescence with settlements. So there was a policy basis, he found, for local gaps. And he was satisfied that the largest of the local gaps was appropriate for a local gap designation in the neighbourhood plan. But he reached the view that the other 2, which were much smaller, more discrete parcels on the edge of the village, were not appropriate. So he acceded to the principle, yes to 1, but the 2, and perhaps it wasn't entirely a coincidence, the 2 that were not regarded as suitable happened to be the 2 which were also identified by the council in their evidence base, although he was very clear to say that his judgment wasn't making any conclusions about the suitability of those sites for residential development. So an interesting warning, if you like, that local plans can get you, or sorry, neighbourhood plans can get you not only on local green spaces, which of course means that the land is treated like a green belt, but also gaps. Watch out for gaps. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Mary. And Sasha, you're going to tell us about appeal by the London Legacy Corporation.
I am. I'm going to be very quick because everyone's waiting to hear Claire, but I just want to say 2 very quick things. First of all, I want to congratulate Paul Tucker, who's the first graduate of Selwyn College in its history to buy merchandise advertising that fact. Secondly, it's a shame we're not doing Nudge of the Week, because I just wanted to talk about for a moment the QC Appointments Board, and what a shower of complete horse manure. They've got one job and the website's been down for 24 hours. So I just have to remark on that. Brilliant, isn't it, on their day of glory that the website doesn't work. Anyway, now on my appeal's about design. And what we have here is a development plan in the London Legacy Development Corporation, which has a development plan that requires exemplary or exceptional design. I mean, that is a lawyer's orgy, isn't it, in policy terms, to have an exceptional design barrier. And this case, this appeal, which was an appeal of Philip Ware in the lovely term Pudding Mill. I know we hear a lot about other parts of England, but isn't it great, London, Pudding Mill? Anyway, in Pudding Mill, a proposal for a large development of 342 units, of which 198 were affordable. Claire would be interested in. Very significant affordable housing development. However, the inspector took the view that that test of exceptional design was not met. And it's interesting that, and I think this is relevant takeaway in the light of the white paper and the increased emphasis on design, the inspector concluded, unlike most of my opening and closing submissions, that design policies are, quote, of central importance in the development plan. So I think the takeaway for all our viewers are, do underestimate design policies at your peril.
Agreed.
Thanks, Sasha. For some reason, you mentioned your opening and closing, which reminded me, do you still write all your submissions in capital letters, or have you worked out where the capital locks?
No, I only did that. I only did that when
capital locks key is.
I only did that when you were my junior, Charlie, because I didn't understand it otherwise.
Every inspector watching it, every witness, everyone who's worked will realise what I mean by that. He doesn't know it's just here, Sasha. Just there. That's Now, on to our guests. We're going to go into with Claire slightly differently to our usual format, as it's the last episode of the season. We're all going to ask questions rather than being a sort of main interview. So we're going to go around. We've got 2 questions each, which we hope we'll get time to do. Obviously, as always, please do, viewers, send in your own questions. And as always, we're going to start with Mary. So Mary, you kick us off with your question.
Claire, what's the biggest issue facing your sector right now, and why? And I wonder, is it the lack of financial support from the government? Is it cladding? What are the issues is the biggest one you face?
So we've been operating in almost a perfect storm during the last 9 months or so as the pandemic has taken grip. But that's not to say we're not used to periods of turbulence, because the 12 months before that, the housing market was dominated by Brexit uncertainty. So I would say the biggest issue that we face at the moment is striking the right balance between investing in our existing homes. For my organisation, that's 125,000 homes across the country.
Wow.
And devoting enough resource to building new homes. Homelessness is at an all-time high. And we haven't seen numbers like this in the last decade. There's 250,000 families at the moment, either in temporary or unsuitable accommodation. So for a housing association, which most of us are corporate charities, we rely upon government assistance to help us to do those things which are unusual or out of the ordinary. And at the moment, what's unusual and out of the ordinary is the investment we're having to make in our existing homes because of the changes to building regulations and building standards as a result of the terrible tragedy at Grenfell. And for big organisations, the bill to remediate our buildings is enormous.
Wow, that sounds like a really tricky in-tray, frankly.
Sasha.
Yes, I just want to say, Claire, what a great time it is to have you as a guest to the Christmas period. I mean, someone who devotes their professional life to helping those who really need help is magnificent. And I think the whole panel salutes you, what you do on a daily basis, generally, to improve those who need a voice, need help, need support. So thank you. My question is, in that theme, is how do we get members, local authority members particularly, to take seriously the delivery of housing? In the context, and I know one of our viewers who I've just done a case with will know this, I was in a very well-to-do authority last week that produced less than 50 affordable houses last year, less than 50. And it seems to be without any sanction or embarrassment or concern. How do you believe we can get members at a local level to understand and deliver affordable housing?
Well, I mean, that is pretty shocking, but I have to say there are local authorities up and down the country who do take the provision of affordable housing seriously. I think there's a fundamental problem with the work that we are trying to do, which takes time. The provision of social housing is a labour of love, and it is delivered over many, many years. The democratic focus for most elected officials is what can happen before the next election. And fundamentally, those two things, don't lead to the right outcomes very often. I do think, however, that voter priorities show that housing is a more significant issue now than it has been in the last 20 years or so. And I think for individual members, the issue is trying to engender within their electorate an understanding of why affordable housing is so essential. But at the end of the day, even if everybody agrees that social housing is the right thing to do, it's often not the right thing in the place where the individual is elected. And, that's what causes the difficulty.
Yeah.
Can I just chip in and say, do you think that one of the positives of COVID, and I say this in a very gentle way because it's devastating for many people, but might one of the positives be that we all realise that the areas which are most affected tend to be the areas where people are living in inadequate housing, overcrowding, and that all of us people who have access to fine houses appreciate the significance of housing as a sort of basic right.
Absolutely. So good quality affordable housing is the launch pad for success. in life, in your economic circumstances, in your education, all of those things you can pin back to having good quality, affordable accommodation. And you're right, communities where there is significant overcrowding have been worse hit during this pandemic. And, you know, my residents don't have the luxury of an extra bedroom. So when everybody's at home, they're all having to work in the same crowded space, and they're all having to vie for, you know, the broadband access. And if children are trying to do homework and parents are trying to work, that's a toxic mixture. And what we've seen over the last 9 months is an explosion in antisocial behavior and domestic abuse. And that is all to do with the fact that people are crowded into very tight spaces for longer than is good for them.
Couldn't agree more. So we want more affordable housing. That's obvious. The planning for the future white paper and its proposals contained in it, if they're enacted, are they going to deliver more affordable housing in your judgment, less of it, or will they make not much of a difference?
So I fear less. However, the government are at pains to point out that their ambition is not to deliver less affordable housing as a result of the reforms. I think the difficulty with the white paper is it's not specific enough. So if you take section 106 at the moment, which I'm sure your audience are deeply familiar with, that delivers 50% of the affordable housing in the UK. Now, if you tinker with a mechanism which is understood, although, you know, may not be ideal, you really have to come up with something that is going to deliver at least that much. And I think the detail is still very scant in the white paper.
Thanks.
Agreed. And isn't it a success story that we are delivering 50% of the affordable housing?
Completely.
It may not be enough, but it's a success story.
It is, absolutely. Yep.
Chris,
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Mary. And on your point, Claire, actually, Dame Sally Davis, who was the chief medical officer, specifically identified overcrowding in housing as one of the key contributing factors to why we have the highest level of COVID in Europe. So really, isn't it time we just woke up and we built this? And I have to say, the government going in the wrong direction. Everybody's seen the standard method figures. They've come out, they're focusing on urban areas. These areas very rarely deliver affordable housing. And in fact, in major urban areas like Birmingham, like Bristol, like Leeds, they actually lose more than they build if you take right to buy into effect. So what needs to happen? Because it certainly isn't focusing on urban areas where the housing doesn't cross-subsidise. What is the solution to deliver an absolute step change in affordable housing?
Well, the government priority, first of all, is largely focused on home ownership at the moment. And whilst there is a place for a low start entry into home ownership for some households, it is clearly not the product that a lot of the households that I house need. To give you an idea, the average household income of a new resident into a Clarion property is £15,000.
Wow.
And at that level, home ownership is completely and utterly out of your grasp. So what we need is a bigger program of rented accommodation. And I'm afraid that is just not the government's priority at the moment. So organizations like my own are having to look to use our resources to boost wherever possible new rented product. And we're doing that by utilizing land that we already own on the fringes of our existing estates, and trying to model our new projects and to such an extent that they can deliver more of that rented outcome.
Claire, I'm interested to know what other things Clarion do apart from just provide the bricks and mortar. There's been a lot in the national press about the steps that Clarion have done. And can you just tell us, Clarion are not a recent organisation, are they? They've been around a while.
So the roots of my organisation go back to 1900. We were left a legacy by a Victorian philanthropist, William Sutton, and he he was a businessman, made a fortune during his lifetime. He was the Victorian equivalent of DPD. So he delivered parcels up and down the railways and made a fortune, which he left to a trust so that we could provide for affordable hygienic accommodation for the working poor. So in the roots of the organisation that I'm responsible for, we've always been very keen on supporting our residents into work. And to this day, we are one of the largest non-governmental agencies supporting people into work. Last year, we got 4,000 people into work. And we do that by funding it ourselves through our charitable foundation. We've carried on getting people into work during the pandemic, and some of the stuff you've seen in the press recently is about how we've been doing that. Clearly, we've had to be a bit more innovative. We're getting people into work in industries that we haven't previously tapped into. But nonetheless, fundamentally, if we can get somebody employment, they are far more likely to be able to escape poverty, escape reliance on state benefit, and to start contributing to their neighborhoods and to their communities. And essentially, that's what we're about. We want successful neighborhoods and successful communities where there is economic life. Now, you know, the next 12 months are going to be particularly challenging for the households that I look after. Lots of them are in very insecure employment. So funding our job schemes and our training and our digital inclusion programs, fundamental to the organisation that we are.
Brilliant.
There's appeal decisions going around saying the people who need the houses are often not the ones turning up at public inquiries and the ones that are without a voice. Claire, you're the voice. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. Mary, do you have another question to ask Claire?
My next question really is about you as a woman in a powerful job. How has your journey been to get to where you are at as a woman? You know, we've got lots of young ladies watching this, and I'm sure you'll be an inspiration to some of them. But what could you tell us about your journey?
So I started training with a firm that became PwC many years ago. And I have to say, you know, I joined through the normal graduate recruitment process, and probably about half of the entrants when I joined were women. But when I got into the firm and looked at, you know, where women were in that organization, they were at relatively junior levels, and they certainly, you know, at partner level, hardly any. Now, of course, that has changed enormously during my working career. But I left PwC because client work was incompatible with having young children. And that's how I found myself in social housing. I have worked within the regulator and within housing associations. And, you know, any young lawyers out there who are thinking about the future of their career, I would wholly encourage you to think about social housing. We are the types of organisations, I think, that provide the level of support for women to sustain their careers. When my first child was born, I didn't get any maternity leave at all, because I failed to satisfy the criteria that PwC had at the time for returning to work. When I look now at the organisation I run, we provide support to not only to young women, but to young fathers as well. And, you know, we do everything we can to support people in their careers. And I'm very proud of the organisation I run. And, you know, would happily talk all night about the fantastic things that we do. I suppose my own career, you know, my reflections on it, lots of people supported me on my way through. I have to say most of them were men. And, you know, they were fantastic and have enabled me to get to the position that I am at today.
Well done you, Claire. Well done you. And thank you for sharing that.
Sasha.
Yes, Claire, one of the real evolutionary arguments we're facing in planning inquiries is a contention by a lot of local residents that this isn't really affordable housing. The product that's being offered by our clients is not really affordable housing. what's your experience on the ground when you take on properties from developers? Is it acceptable to your criteria rather than theirs or the council's as to what defines affordable housing?
So because we are so big, we can be picky in the marketplace. The same is not true for all housing associations that need to negotiate with developers. So it's a pretty mixed picture. However, most of us rely on government funding to deliver a product which we call affordable rent. And the amount of subsidy that we get for affordable rent is insufficient for us to reduce the rents any further. Affordable rent enables Clarion to let properties at about 65% of the market rate. So they are affordable in that they are subsidized, but go back to my point about the household income of most of those that I am housing, and there is still some reliance on housing benefit at that level if you're joining a new Clarion property. Of course, historically, we built social rent when grant rates were much higher. And indeed, when I joined social housing, grant rates were 90% of the capital cost of the build of a home. You know, we are lucky if we're getting above 10% in some cases for the capital funding for our new homes. So inevitably, that gets reflected in the rent that we have to charge.
Thank you.
Claire, my second question is going to pick up from where we left off last week, where we talked about custom and self-build. And over the years since that's become that kind of housing has gained real traction in this country. There's been debates about is custom build rather than self-build, is custom build something which is suitable for affordable? Is it something that a provider is able and prepared to take on? Can it add value in the context of affordable housing offer? There's now debates about whether paragraph 64 of the framework completely exempts custom self-build from affordable or simply exempts it from the requirement to do it on site. And so really against that context, for anyone who's got a particular interest in that kind of housing, I want to know what your thoughts, Claire, on has that kind of housing got a role to play in the delivery of affordable? And if so, what do you see that role being?
So not for an organization like mine, I have to say. So the priority for us always will be to provide accommodation at the lowest possible cost. And what that means is, generally speaking, we stick to relatively traditional methods of construction and build. There's a long history of housing associations supporting self-build. But it tends to be done at a very local level by very small organizations and organizations that support and train people in the trades in order for them to be able to deliver self-build. But you know, at the way in which my organization operates, that's just not economic for us to be able to do.
Because it will come at the cost of delivering more.
Yeah,
conventional.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so that's thank you.
Oh, sorry, I think I've dived in the head of Chris. I do apologise, Chris.
Okay, it's all right, I'm used to it.
I'm giving you a boost today. I think I'm probably entitled to it. So yeah, you can wait now, mate.
That's a quid pro quo. Look, Claire, can I just ask something that Martin Twigg of Gladman has asked? And there's a lot of people who ask this. We go around the country trying to establish whether there's a 5-year supply of housing. But that means housing generally. The government up to now has been very shy to set any kind of real test for affordable housing. There should be, I think most of us think, a 5-year supply test for the delivery of affordable housing. Do you agree? Do you think that should be in there in government policy?
I do, absolutely. Yes, I mean, I think achieving some certainty around the longer term planning for affordable housing would be wholly desirable. But you have to remember that housing associations are only one part of this jigsaw. Local authorities are able to build now. Of course, registered providers who operate for a profit are also able to build. So, you know, it's quite crowded territory, but in the context of the country, should be building 300,000 homes a year. We're building nothing like that. The more the merrier, frankly, I think. And a policy that encouraged that longer term focus in terms of our pipelines would be wholly desirable.
Brilliant.
The irony is that whenever you see neighbourhood plan questionnaires, the one thing that is always top of the list is that locals would welcome affordable housing. They don't like the general market housing, but affordable housing is welcome.
Yeah, well, Paul, they welcome it, but just not next to them. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. Claire, I'm going to change the question I was going to ask. I'm quite struck by a question from Rachel Goddard, and I should say, by way of background, despite the clipped tones of my received pronunciation accent, I was actually born in a council house and spent my early years south of Scarborough. You'd never guess. The question is, would it be appropriate to use additional 106 contributions to justify assisting homeless people to get an affordable house in terms of covering the cost of counselling, advising them generally, setting them up, and from a position of literally having nothing? Is that something that has legs?
So we work with St Mungo, who are one of the premier providers of support to street sleepers. The route from the street into accommodation at the moment is tortuous. On continental Europe, they have been pioneering a thing called Housing First, which is you get the person into a house and then you provide all the support services around it in order to enable them to succeed in their tenancy. There have been some pilots in the UK on that, but generally speaking, the experience of someone sleeping rough at the moment is they go through a series of steps, they get picked up by the outreach team, they get put into supported accommodation. Quite often that's hostel accommodation, and they may languish there for quite some time before they make that journey into more permanent accommodation. The truth is, many of those people have vulnerabilities and they find that journey very, very difficult. It's funded at the moment through charities and through contracts with individual local authorities. I suppose I'm loath to say that Section 106 should be diverted to anything other than bricks and mortar, because what the effect of that will be that we build less homes. But I'm wholly supportive of a better system for supporting the likes of St Mungo's to make that journey easier.
Here. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Claire. Well, we're going to have to draw to a close here. We're not going to have our usual champion nudge of the week because we covered extra cases. But I think if we were going to have a champion, Claire, I think it would be you for the wonderful work you and your organisation are doing of its particular value at this time of year. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and please do come back. We'll say to the guests, please do come back on the show. We're not going to disappear anytime soon, but we are going to disappear today and for the rest of this year. This is our last show of the year. What a year it's been in so many ways. We're quite pleased to see the back of it, and I'm sure most people will. We will be back in January. I think I'm right to say, someone correct me today, I think it's the 14th. Is the date. I'm getting thumbs up, Thursday the 14th, at which point I will, if the restrictions permit, be in my favourite district in the whole world.
Where's that, Charlie? I've never heard it. Where is that? You never mentioned it.
I'll be up there. I'm really looking forward to that. And in the meantime, all we can say is have a happy Christmas or whatever festive celebration you have planned. And a wonderful new year with your however many people you're allowed to be with.
Charlie, don't forget our Christmas gift to the viewers.
The podcast. The podcasts, yes.
You had him flummoxed then.
Bloody
There was
amateur.
a moment of panic on his face.
Amateurs. Who are working with?
Yeah.
Some animals and children to work with instead.
He's been hard work all day, hasn't he? This has been a tough show.
People think he's in fancy dress. He's been in the pub for 3 hours.
Yeah.
No,
Come on, Anna.
we've got some work, so we're going to be converting everything to podcasts. And there's been loads of emails about this, and to be quite honest, I've not paid very much attention to them.
Yeah. What does it mean? I've got to admit, there's been a hell of a lot of traffic. What is a podcast?
Come off it, Sasha.
Actually, you should be a Michael Judge.
Yeah, easily. Who's Gaza?
Yeah, he's gathered. Go on, Paul, tell us what we're doing. Go on, for our viewers' benefit.
That's what we're doing. You know all about it.
Right. Okay. So the plan is that we've got umpteen different shows that are sitting on the website for people to watch. We're going to convert it into audio form so that people can download it and listen to the podcast. That's not to listen to us wittering on in the way we have done for the last 5 minutes. It's to listen to some of the most amazing and inspirational people in planning that we've had over the last year. So that's our gift to everybody.
Charlie, I've read about 1,000 emails on this, and I thought, how is this different to what we've done? Thank you.
And the last thing is thank you, viewers. I mean, the viewing figures continue to be fantastic. We wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for all of our viewers.
Yes.
Charlie, absolutely, that's right. We have had, over the course of the whole series this year, over 100,000 views.
Yes.
And
Wow.
none of that would be possible without all of you watching us. We are so grateful.
Come back in the new year. We're hoping we could do it once the vaccination is rolled out. We might do something in person or something like that in the year. So watch this space. But we'll be back in the usual format on the 14th of January. Have a great break. Thank you again, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Happy
Bye,
Christmas,
Claire.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.